Hello everybody out there in F1 world. Welcome to the live stream on the, what is it, the Wednesday after Vegas or the Wednesday before Qatar? Losing track on all this now. It's both, of course, in the middle of this amazing climax to the Formula One World Championship. Just turning down the volume on my phone there just to make sure that we're looking live and sounding live. I think we are. No doubt there'll be lots of comments if we're not, in the usual fashion. And I must have a disclaimer again at the start of all this, because outside we've got force 5 winds on the Beaufort scale. I think it is. I think it's Beaufort, which is supposed to be a fresh breeze, a few choppy waves on the ocean if you're nearby. It sounds like a lot more than that from where I'm sitting right now. It sounds like the whole roof's about to blow off. But because, of course, there's no such thing as climate change, as we're constantly told by a certain person, we shouldn't worry about anything at all, should we? Gales, whatever. Anyway, let's hope that the internet stays where it is, hopefully right now, which I think is pretty strong. I'm on Wi-Fi, which is not the greatest of things, but that's only because I don't have enough holes in the side of the computer on this particular makeshift computer that I'm using, my son's MacBook Pro, but thanks to Jack for that one. It seems to be standing up reasonably well under the pressure. Anyway, without any more ado, we'll get into it. I had one question from a viewer, Tim Kern, who, pretty complicated, esoteric question, kind of above my pay grade, I think, but I'll read it out. Formula One cars have a lot of anti-dive and anti-squat. They're trying to keep, especially at the front, a consistent angle of attack. But if they had less anti-dive, deceleration would cause the front to dive, creating drag and increasing traction on the fronts, through both weight transfer and aero downforce. Slow rebounding dampers, this is where it gets quite heavier. I mean, I remember Carlos Reutemann saying, dampers he can do. Rebound, anybody who says they can get on top of rebound, yeah, really, you got to take them with a pinch of salt. Anyway, slow rebounding dampers would predictably preserve the aero downforce to prevent washout on the exit and eventually approach zero angle on the straights while increasing rearward weight transfer, less oversteering, wheel spin tendency. Damping, amount of travel and rebound would all need to accommodate each track and could be changed perhaps even by the driver as conditions dictated. We'd like to hear your views on this. So basically he's talking about slow rebounding dampers. So I asked Mark Slade, and bless him, he actually replied with a text on WhatsApp, and this is his reply. Too much to go through there, really. There are loads of other factors that will have influenced anti-dive choice, not least being aero effect of the wishbone positions. Pretty sure McLaren think they have the best compromise, and track performance backs that up. Dampers are to help keep the tyre on track. It is possible to play with very low velocity damping, as suggested, to influence the car's transient response, but take care necessary to avoid compromising grip. Again, suspect McLaren have done their homework in this area. I'd say it's one of their strengths. No simple answers, I'm afraid. So anyway, thanks for that one, Tim. I think you're somewhere near the mark of what McLaren are doing. I think that's quite impressive, actually, to be honest with you. Yeah, good stuff. Anyway, let's get down to the questions coming in now on YouTube chat, because I think there are plenty of them, and we'll just have a look now and see where we're going with that. Where are we? Browser. Here we go. First one is from our friend Ashad Chowdhury. Thank you very much, Ashad, for starting this off on the poll. Hi, Mr. Windsor. A bit of cricket. Although I like a soft entry to the live streams, get my brain sort of slowly turning over. And Formula One analogy, maybe. But it seems McLaren is basically choking when it comes to their drivers and losing them the driver's title. Hungary 24, Monza 25, Vegas 26. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a bit like, choking is a bit like that overused word, he's in form or he's out of form. I mean, what does that really mean in a Formula One context? Because there are so many factors involved. I would say, having said all of that, I would say Oscar Piastri is not in very good form, to have a cricket analogy. At the moment, his form, he needs a little bit more a lot of net practice, actually, probably. Make that sort of Rob Wilson type stuff in a very urban environment, cold, windy, get your hands dirty, remind you of what Formula Ford was all about type stuff. But getting back to a serious point, are McLaren choking? I think they kind of are choking, but it's not under the pressure. They're choking more as a result of the decisions they've taken over the last 2 or 3 years. The prime decision being, of course, not to have a key driver and a very good support driver, but to have 2 key drivers. And as I've said from day one, and as I said ad nauseum to Cameron on Monday, you can talk about everybody being happy and everybody getting on and everybody being great friends. The 2 drivers interchange information and they help one another. But if it's a championship, it's always going to end in tears. And McLaren have no answer as to how to solve that problem. And yeah, of course, if they try to compromise on Lando's car to give him a bit of margin on fuel or ride height, on the basis that he's sufficiently comfortable with points that he could afford to finish 2nd or 3rd if necessary and not go for the win, that margin is immediately going to be attacked by Oscar Piastri's side of the garage. And so they can't take any margins on either car. And that's the problem. That is the Michael Schumacher philosophy of Formula One, of how not to do it. And that's why he always wanted Eddie Irvine or Rubens Barrichello or Felipe Massa in the other car. All quick drivers, all, well, certainly Rubens and Felipe capable of winning Grand Prix in their own right. Eddie capable of winning a race, if Mika Salo is nice to him. But in general, Michael had it his own way, and that's the way it has to be, as Max does, as George does, and as Charles kind of is at Ferrari, although the sort of whole brand effect of Lewis is spilling into his side of the garage, still is, I think. So that's the problem. And it goes back, you can look at a problem in isolation and say, why are McLaren doing this? Are they choking? But as I said, I've got a website, which sadly I don't use very much. I suppose I should, but I've got a quote up there saying there's no such thing as luck. There's a reason for everything, behind everything. And if you look at where McLaren's choking is now, you can take it right back to the day they decided they had to have Oscar Piastri instead of Daniel Ricciardo. Simple as that, in my opinion. And, we don't really need to talk about it very much, apart from, what a shame it is that they've gone that route, really. Good for Oscar, you could say. He's won more Grand Prix than if he'd been at Alpine, but I don't think he'd be at Alpine now. I think he'd be somewhere else. He'd be at Merck or Ferrari or somewhere by now. Anyway, there we go. Thank you very much for that one. Another one from you. If the hire a future champion and a race win capable number 2 method is so well known, why Zach Brown and Andrea Stella are so against it? Their master plan may be just winning the constructors. Well, your guess is as good as mine. The way Formula One is projected now, and the way the teams like to project themselves, is that they have these elder statesmen they're called team principals. They were never called team principals in Ken Tyrrell's era. They were just called team managers, which is a much more appropriate title in my opinion. But with this whole team principal, after the headmaster of the school, team headmaster is the principal. It all comes down to, bottom line, stops there, and major decisions like at Ferrari, shall we get Adrian Newey or not, or shall we replace Carlos Sainz or not, or at McLaren, shall we replace Daniel Ricciardo or not, are made by these people. And it's beyond me, because it seems that a lot of the decision making is not based on real feel for the Formula One pit lane and what you need in order to win Grand Prix, and looking at the history of the sport and the way it's evolved and the lessons we can learn. And you can look at plenty of opportunities of drivers to win championships being lost because points have been taken away by the other driver. 07, good example at McLaren. 86, very good example at Williams. And this year, if Lando had had Daniel in the car from year one, from race one last year, this year, I think he probably would have won the championship by now. But they don't want to look at the Michael Schumacher philosophy. They've got to do it their way. And I keep calling it the glad, happy, let's all hold hands, sit around the campfire, we're all friends way. And I say that sarcastically because there's nobody that Oscar Piastri wants to beat more right now than Lando Norris, and vice versa. And so, what is that all about? And there is no master plan, of course. That's another supercilious thing that I've been talking about, Zach's master plan, because there is no master plan. It was just, Oscar's quicker than Daniel, I got to have him. That was all it was. No thinking at all. A bit like Ron Dennis saying Joe Ramirez is a great chief mechanic stroke team manager, got to have him, but didn't really need him at the time, but had to have him to stop anybody else having him. Same with Gordon Murray with Ron. Got to have Gordon, stop anybody else having him. Not quite sure what we're going to do with him, but we'll have him. And so it goes on. They just do that. And I don't think Frank was ever guilty of that sort of approach, to be honest. Frank used to leave it to the last possible moment, the other way around, and then pay more for it. But he quite liked the ego trip of having to pay a lot for the person that everybody else wanted, sort of thing, Vicky R1490. Hi Peter. If we assume McLaren were trying to reduce plank wear at the end of the race for Lando, and you have mentioned that both cars might have the same setup, why didn't they tell Oscar to do the same? Well, yeah, we don't know. I mean, I've got a raft of videos out at the moment post Vegas, obviously on the back of my race video, and I've followed it up with quite some great chats with Mark Slade. Great from his point of the input from Mark. And he still doesn't know for sure what they were doing at the end of the race, because it didn't make a lot of sense to be backing off through turn 13 for fuel. So you got to assume it's plank. But if it's plank, the damage was done already. And then there was the counter radio message from Will Joseph saying, okay, we're kind of where we want to be now, Lando. You can speed up again. But that suggests it's a fuel thing, which is confusing, because turn 13 is not the place to back off and then on the power. It's not the place to conserve fuel. So the jury's out really on whether they did know or not. And if you look at the demeanor of Lando after the race, it would suggest that they didn't think they were in real trouble at that point. And if they were in real trouble, why didn't they do something about it much earlier in the race if it was a plank thing? So I don't think we can assume it was a plank thing at the moment, or ever really. I don't think they knew what was going on. It was a very, very strange and obviously poorly run weekend, because they didn't leave anything like enough margin compared with the other teams. And as I said to Mark, and as I said in my video, if any team was going to leave a margin, it would be McLaren, because they've won the Constructors and they've got two drivers fighting for the Drivers' Championship. The one thing you don't want to do is go anywhere near a disqualification thing in case one of them gets disqualified and one isn't. They're trying to be very fair to both of them. So you'd leave margin. Even more reason you'd leave margin. And they're the team that didn't leave the margin. That's the extraordinary thing. And we know how difficult it was with the rain on Saturday and the lack of full tank running and so forth. But it doesn't explain McLaren's lack of conservatism. It doesn't explain their aggression in terms of ride heights. But again, just to repeat the point, I don't think we can assume that they were doing all that stuff at the end of the race just for plank wear. And that explains why the Oscar thing didn't come into. I mean, the Oscar thing was slightly different because he got into graining very early in the race, much earlier than Lando. So he was having to go into a tyre management mode much earlier than Lando. So maybe his plank wear as a result was less at that critical point, on the assumption that McLaren knew what was going on with the plank wear quite early on. Oscar would have been the driver less exposed to that, because he was nursing the graining at that point. All very strange, though. All good talking points, though. Vicky, again, in Brazilian Grand Prix, I got to see that Max was able to make short corners more effective when following by staying out of dirty air because other corners were going long. If he was behind Leclerc, who has similar cornering style, would Max then go wider to rotate the car faster? And is this why he struggles to follow or overtake Leclerc? Examples: Brazil 24, Spa 25. That's a good point. You say, Max naturally turning in a little bit earlier than, say, Lando, but when he's behind Leclerc, he's kind of got the dirty air. Let me think about that. Yes, I think if he did, I think you're right. I think if he's behind Leclerc and Leclerc's kind of using the bit of road that Max naturally wants to use, as I've said before, there is not just one short corner line. if you've got the ability to create a short corner in the way Leclerc and Verstappen have, you also have the ability, because of your incredible touch and feel for the surface of the road and your perfectly harmonized rates of input into the car, because of all that, you can quite easily run a slightly different line, take a slightly different geometrical apex line, and still be very quick. And I think that's Max would probably do that. If he felt that he was behind this car, going to be behind it for a lot of laps, and there was not much he was going to be able to do about it, then yeah, for sure, that's what he would do. He'd try to get out of the dirty air as much as possible. And it's a good point, because I think a guy like Max and a guy like Leclerc have more ability to get out of dirty air because of their softness of touch and because of the sweet spot that they can create, than a driver who's kind of right on the edge of braking as late as possible, turning in as late as he can based on when he can get the power on as soon as possible and have the highest possible minimum speed. That sort of driver is not going to have a lot to play with if he's behind a similar driver, whereas a Max has, because he's not driving because of the line he wants to create. He's driving because of the sweet spot he's creating and all the variables that he's managing at any given moment. As I've said before, every corner is different. And in terms of that perfect rotation point that a Max or a Charles wants to achieve, it's different, slightly different, every corner of every lap, because everything's changing. All the weights are changing in the car in terms of the fuel load, in terms of the heat through the tires, through the brakes. Everything is different. The track is evolving. Everything is slightly different. And that's what Max and Charles, probably not quite to the same extent of Max, are constantly feeling those changes and adapting that to the rotation point that they know they inevitably have to do and create at some point. Whereas, a Liam Lawson will sort of blindly do what he always does, which is brake in a straight line as late as possible, get the power on as soon as possible, be ready with the correction of the oversteer because he's got great car control. And all of which is true and great and fast, and he's very good at it, as is Carlos Sainz in a more sophisticated way now, probably. But it doesn't leave a lot of margin for playing around with the variables. That's the difference. But thanks for highlighting that, Vicky. I mean, it's a really interesting subject. Sarosh Soman, all the regulars are out on parade today. Peter, do you think that the gap between Verstappen and Leclerc is increasing? In my view, Leclerc is driving unbelievably well with the Ferrari. Looks like he just can't get or manufacture a sweet spot in that car. Well, he is manufacturing a sweet spot in the car. It's just not a very big sweet spot. And that's how he's able to have some sort of consistency. I've always said it's more fun watching drivers, great drivers, when they're in a bad car than a good car. Watching Jackie Stewart in a BRM H16 was actually more interesting than watching him in a Tyrrell 003, in my opinion, because you saw Jackie having to drive this thing on the absolute edge all the time, this massively heavy, difficult BRM H16. And there are so many good examples of that. Jim Clark in 66 when he's in a 2-litre Lotus Climax against the 3-litre Ferraris and Brabhams, and what Jimmy was having to do with that car to be competitive. And in recent years we've seen Max, when Red Bull haven't been that competitive, still creating the perfect race around the package he's given. And we have that today with Charles Leclerc. That Ferrari is a difficult, bad car, and we can see it with the results of Lewis Hamilton. If it's Lewis Hamilton, Marc Genet at Ferrari, and all of our assessment of Ferrari's car was based around what Lewis was doing this year, we'd be even more critical of Ferrari. But at least Charles is getting the thing into the points, he's getting it into Q3. And yeah, he's just driving it on the absolute edge. He is finding a sweet spot, but it's a tiny sweet spot, and it's very, very easy to go over that, the edges of that, and for the tires to go off and to make a mistake from a driver's point of view, all the things that come from having a tiny sweet spot. But is it making Charles a better driver? Probably, because he's having to be really sharp in everything he does. I don't mean sharp in terms of spikiness. I mean sharp in terms of being awake and alert to everything that's going on around him and getting the best from the car and the best from the strategy and the best from the people around him. And that's always a good thing, I guess. It's a bit like, you could say, the old argument of having a super quick driver in the other car that keeps you on their toes. I don't agree with that philosophy, and I think the way Charles is developing as a driver now is a much more organic thing. And if by some miracle Ferrari have a great car in 2026, it'll just be nirvana for Charles, because he's had such a difficult 25. It'll be, I can do what I want with the car now. You know, like Nigel in 91, 92 at Williams, having driven that 88 Williams, which was, you know, the Judd car, but the active car, which is not a very good active car at that point. So yeah, it's a good point, and it is. And I think is Charles getting nearer to Verstappen? I don't think he's that far apart anyway in terms of his natural feel for the car. And yeah, I think he is very near Max, because the Ferrari is so difficult and because of the races he's having to drive. Somewhat below the radar, obviously, you know, sitting behind Antonelli all that way in Vegas, but Charles driving beautifully in a very, very difficult car. You know, it'd be interesting well, we know what it looks like, sadly, in the hands of Lewis at the moment, who's kind of lost, isn't he? Sarosh again. Peter, do you think Prost and Max drive with a similar mindset of operating within the envelope of the car? Prost looks so smooth and fast that you don't get a feeling that he's pushing akin to Max. Yeah, very similar. I mean, Prost was definitely a short corner driver. All the feel that we talk about with Max and Charles, Prost had that in spades. And I think he learned a lot from Nicky at a time when racing was obviously more dangerous, for a start, and secondly, when there were more cars on track at any given moment. It was very easy to get involved in other people's shunts. The way the slower cars were warned of the faster cars overtaking them, the back markers was not as efficient as today. There were so many other variables going on that when Prost was paired up with Nicky, he learnt very quickly on how to get through a first corner without somebody touching your front wing, and how to get through a race without losing a lot of time lapping people or with other extraneous things going on. Just be focused on exactly how to get the best from the car. And he learnt that from Nicky. But one of the byproducts of that was to come back a little bit in the way he pushed the envelope and the way he drove within his sweet spot. And given that he was and still is probably a very, very good short corner driver and has all that feel, all that perfect rate of input. He's really good, Prost. Never underrate how good he was. If you combine that with leaving a margin everywhere, that's what you saw when it was Prost against Senna. He was the guy that set all of the race fastest laps, many more than Senna, and never really went for the pole, left it for Senna. And he was always thinking of finishing the race and getting through the first corner. And whether, you know, he doesn't therefore, I guess, fulfill the image of many fans in terms of being a racer in the way Senna was. But at the same time, he won his World Championships and he won his Grand Prix. And thank you very much. Isn't that what it's all about, sort of thing, you know? And as I say, I think a lot of that was his time with Nicky. From 83, what was it, 83 to 86? Yeah, 85, yeah. 84, end of 84, yeah, there you go. 2 years. Vicky again. Peter, I think the possible strategies for Qatar will be medium, medium, soft, medium, soft, medium, soft, medium, medium. What do you feel when I say it's going to be a very exciting race? Well, yeah, of course. It depends what you mean by exciting. We're going in with two sort of outside influence restraints, aren't we? One is that it's a sprint weekend, and so everybody pushes the envelope as much as they can in free practice one, or free practice, because there's no other free practice, in terms of ride heights, in terms of tyres, everything. You've got to try and you've got to go to the absolute and then come back, because it's a sprint weekend on all of that. So that'll be interesting. It'll be an interesting free practice for a start. And secondly, of course, there's the Pirelli ruling of limit 25 laps per set of tyres for the weekend, which helps some teams which are quite hard on tyres and probably hurts other teams which have pretty good tyre management, not so hard on the tyres, like McLaren. So there's all that going on, and it's going to be, as a result, obviously it's going to be at least a two-stopper. And it's a question then of the hardest tyres in the Pirelli range. It's a very, very hot, sort of Singapore-like climate there in terms of heat, 40 degrees potentially. It's humid potentially, lots of sand and dust. And yeah, it's going to be a tough race physically for the drivers. and tough race for the cars over the curbs, which are still there, the fast corners. There's only one slow corner, I think, from memory. Yeah, it's only one slow corner. And so all the others are medium to high speed. And so you might well see any variation, really. It depends where you are on the grid of what you'll choose. But whatever you do, it'll be there's a lot of pressure on getting everything right. I mean, for me, it smells like a race weekend where a team like Red Bull, who are very good at sort of, as I say, sniffing the air and just making judgment calls on what they see in front of him rather than what a strategy department tell them is the way to go. Obviously, they will be relying very much on the strategy department, but there's enough sort of gut feel for racing at Red Bull for them more or less to make the right choices. That's what it feels like going into Qatar, whereas McLaren might over manage the whole weekend. Who knows? We'll see. I mean, a lot of pressure on McLaren, obviously, in terms of having to get both drivers going well, and Lando, you know, will have to get as much information as he can in free practice 1 and get the pole for the sprint, have a clean start, not have anybody trouble him at the first corner of the sprint, win the sprint, and do the same again. It's a big ask. It's a big ask. And you got guys like Max, obviously George, maybe Charles, will be very, very good in that sort of pressure situation. Lewis too, maybe. I mean, it's about time Lewis had a decent weekend again, isn't it? Jez James, hi Peter, a bit off subject. Have you ever been to Port Isaac in Cornwall where Doc Martin is filmed? Worth a visit if not. I think this was a reference I made. Watching Doc Martin was a bit more interesting than something else. I can't remember where it was, but actually I haven't been there. No, I've been to Cornwall. Last time I went to Cornwall actually was to watch the Bloodhound testing. God, what a shame that Andy Green and the whole Bloodhound thing never really happened in its final attempt to break the sound barrier. But I went down to see that test. That's the last time I was in Cornwall, quite a while ago now. So I've never been there. I should go. But my mum and dad used to live in a place called Beminster in Dorset, where Martin, the star of Doc Martin, lived as well. And we used to see him down at the village quite a lot. Good bloke, really good bloke. And it's a very well made thing. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it, but it's kind of reminds me a little bit of Formula One, the way he is, you know, out of the way, do this, blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of like how the Formula One key players are towards their minions as well, I always think. Anyway, that's moving on. Jez James. Also, the 81 Belgian Grand Prix came up on my feed recently where a mechanic got driven at the start. It seems unreal now that such a thing could happen. We've come a long way from lessons learned. Yeah, that was terrible. I was there watching that I was actually watching it from the little media grandstand thing they had. And I can remember it. You know, I knew all the guys on the Arrows car. Siegfried Storr stalled, and it was a sort of natural reaction. You know, mechanic jumped over and put the slave battery in the back. I think even did that, and yeah, you know, terrible thing. And that's why we have such safety today, and all the rules we have today are based on accidents and incidents like that. And crossing the track during a race was also obviously a horrendous thing with the Tom Price accident at South Africa in 77. And I remember writing a letter to Bernie about 1979, I think. It was after a Brazilian Grand Prix. It may have been 78, actually. I think it was after the race at Rio. There was some marshals crossing the track and a couple of photographers. I remember writing a letter to Bernie saying, I can't believe that we haven't learned from the Tom Price thing. You know, why is it we still have marshals running across the track in the middle of the race to pick up pieces of debris? Surely there has to be a safer way of doing it. And to his credit, well, and to my surprise, Bernie wrote back a very nice letter agreeing with me 100% and then saying, you know, they need to be more focused on coming up with rules to stop all that. And yeah, you know, that 81 thing. And of course, it wasn't just that 81 start. Also in practice, a mechanic was killed as well. A very, very cramped pit lane when Carlos pulled out of the Williams little garage. It wasn't even a garage, and the cars were just backed into the pit wall, and then there was a tiny gap where the cars could sort of just turn, and then there was the concrete pit wall. And one of the Azella mechanics, which is the team next to Williams, sort of missed his footing and stepped down and just stepped down onto the track as Carlos was pulling out very slowly, and Carlos's left front hit the mechanic, and he sort of went back and sadly hit his head on the ground, and that was a fatal accident. And that was a terrible weekend. That absolutely appalling. And then if you think what happened at Zolder in '82 with Gilles, it's a sad thing, because Zolder is a great racetrack. I went there for a truck race, would you believe, not that long ago, and it's still the same place. And I used to love going to Zolder, but now it just sends shivers down my spine whenever I think of it. Such a shame. Pranay Sharma 3011. Hi Peter, what did you think about Sainz P3 in qualifying? Well, I thought he was brilliant. Only 6 drivers managed actually to do a lap before the yellows came out, and Carlos got out there early and did that on the intermediates. He'd been quick anyway, quickish in Q1, Q2 on the wet tyres, which was great to see. I remember when Carlos, I used to watch Carlos a lot in Formula BMW, let alone Formula 3, and he was always nothing but unbelievable car control, sideways everywhere, particularly Formula BMW. It was amazing car control. And I remember saying once, when he eventually got his Formula 1 chance into Toro Rosso, that he's going to be phenomenal in the wet. I can't wait to see him. And I remember that year it was wet in Austin, and it was like his second lap out of the pits, he lost it coming down the hill before turn 3, had a massive lose, and I think hit the barrier or something. I remember thinking, what's that all about? Carlos is supposed to be on the pole here. But now he's a different driver, isn't he? He's got a much better feel for the sweet spot, for knowing what his limitations are and knowing how not to energize the car too much when he's looking for grip. And he's just got this beautiful feel for the back of the car, which Mark Slade was also talking about, which he noticed at Renault. And just wonderful to see. And good luck to him. He got out, did the time, and there he was. Did the lap time, finished P3, and great. Lovely to see. And for every time Carlos goes well, he's always way ahead of the Ferraris, isn't he? I mean, I don't know what John Alcon thinks or Freddie thinks whenever that happens, whether they think, why did we get rid of that guy? Or whether they just sort of, I'm really pleased for Carlos, he's in a Williams now, but he's going well, what a great guy. I don't know how they think. They should be thinking, what were we doing? Why did we split up that partnership? That's what they should be thinking, in my opinion, because he's very, very good. And I thought it was quite interesting that, I don't know which phone it's on, that over that weekend, there's Carlos Sainz Sr., in Red Bull overalls, doing something with a Dakar Ford Raptor, I think it was. Yeah, there you go. Look at that. There's Carlos Sainz. That's over the Vegas weekend. Cool, eh? What a guy he is. Still going strong. I bet he's super quick in that thing as well. Wonderful. Alviez04. Hi Peter, hope you're well. Do you think the formation lap, turn 1 and disqualification will affect Lando mentally? He's been better this year, but Max always seems to get in his head. Well, he was definitely in his head as he was finishing that formation lap, wasn't he? And going on about, that's more than the permitted gap and you're not allowed to do that. That's weird, isn't it? Because as we pointed out in the video, but we now have post-race, the regulation just says the field has to remain tightly bunched and standing starts are not permitted. But as I said in that, and as Mark pointed out as well, Mark Slade, the grey area is absolutely huge, because what is tightly bunched if the car in front is doing burnouts and you want to give him a bit of margin and not be too close to him, which the FIA would totally agree with. So, Max was doing nothing wrong, and Lando arguably was too slow pulling up to his grid slot. As Mark pointed out, you lose more temperature from the tyres when the car is travelling slowly on a cold track than you do actually stationary in your pole position. So whilst we love to say, the car, look at all the heat pouring out of the tyres as he's standing there stationary, in reality it's better in that situation to just do your burnouts and get up to the front of the grid. or wait, you know, make sure you don't get too far ahead of the guy behind you. There's the other thing. I mean, you are on the pole. But he didn't do either. And then, you know, I think he then panicked because of that. And then it was in his head. And then he made a slow start. And then he moved so aggressively across to the left, away from the grippy line of the thing. And, you know, he's really crowding Max. And then to the point where Max is thinking, well, his tyres are dirty now. I'll just go back onto the clean side of the road. Thank you very much. And passed him. So slightly, that wouldn't necessarily be relevant to turn one in Qatar because it's not a street circuit and all those things don't necessarily apply. But turn one at Qatar, we've seen. It can be incredibly dodgy as well in terms of car positioning. So interesting to see what goes on there, Qatar. Pulse rate. My pulse rate would probably be pretty high. I imagine Max's will be quite low. Lando's will probably be higher than normal, I would imagine. Well, it depends where they are on the grid, of course, but it's going to be pretty tense. Alvaz04 again. With the new floor of the Red Bull, can we expect Max to be strong in Qatar as he was in Austin? He does seem to like the high-speed corners, but the car still has a narrow operating window. Yeah, well, right now, I'm pretty sure if any of the Red Bull engineers were reading your question, they would say, well, we'll wait and see, won't we? I'm sure they don't know exactly, do they? Because it's all to do with, are the tyres in the operating window that makes the car work? And if it's not, they then have to compromise the car to get the tyres into the operating window. And that's when the sweet spot becomes smaller, and that's when it's more difficult to operate. But with the 25 lap limit on the tyres, that's less of an issue. And as you say, you know, in theory, the Red Bull should generate pretty good tyre window temperatures and should be okay. So can we expect? I don't think anybody expects anything these days because nobody really knows what's going to happen next. So I don't think we can expect it, but I think, you know, I'm sure, I think the Red Bull will be okay there. But it is the hardest of the Pirelli compounds, whether that's significant or not. Mind you, it's really hot as well. So how am I? WCR Movies. Hi Peter, how are you? I'm very well, thank you very much. WCR Movies. Hope the weather's good there. Yeah, it's lovely weather in Spain. I'm going to annoy you now with another picture I took last night, actually, as we were just leaving the golf course after Jack's after-school practice. Where are we? Yeah, look at that. That was the sunset yesterday. And there the orange shows up a little bit better there. It was just flame red. No fire or anything going on. It's just beautiful there. Yeah, sunsets and dawns, gorgeous. Cold wind coming from the northeast and then funneling down into the Mediterranean, but beautiful in the day. And it's definitely going to be t-shirt weather by 1 o'clock, Dexter walking time, t-shirts and shorts, and then back to a jacket in the evening. So yeah, beautiful. Couldn't be better, really. Thank you very much for asking. Anyway, I'm sure there was a point to your question, rambling on here. Yeah, here we go. The late season disqualified reminded me of reading about the Malaysian 99 Ferrari disqualifications. Could you please explain that story? Began watching in 2005. Yeah, it was Ferrari after the race were declared illegal, a little bit like, as you say, the Vegas thing. And the key issue was Eddie Irvine's car, which had finished P2 with Michael Schumacher, basically preventing him getting anywhere near Mika Hakkinen. And so Irvine lost his points, but then Ferrari got them back on appeal. And most people thought that was correct, that there was some sort of measurement that was being used in Parc Ferme. I'm slightly vague on it now, but there was a measurement used in Parc Ferme which wasn't necessarily global in the way it could measure the actual piece. And so they were reinstated, and Eddie Irvine then went into the Japanese Grand Prix really in pole position to win the World Championship in 99, and it was going to be close. So he celebrated early, as far as I know, went to Tokyo and had a good night out, and then had a massive shunt the next day on Friday at Suzuka, wrote the car off in a ridiculous place, that right kink just before the hairpin at Suzuka. and never really recovered after that. And Mika won it and won the race, won the World Championship. But yeah, it was a big thing at the time. And Jean Todt, of course, was running Ferrari, and it went to the FIA very quickly, and they were reinstated. But I don't think that's going to happen now. The measuring systems and the rulings, well, specifically on those titanium skid blocks, are definitely, it's definitely black and white. So there's no discussion. This was to do with the size of a barge board, I think it was, and how you measured that, and it was not very clear. And they did what they could in Parc Fermé, but it was not, as I say, it wasn't a global thing that stood up under really tight re-scrutineering. So a little bit messy, but that was kind of what happened. Alessandro Durango, 2766. Hi, Peter. If Leclerc really went to Aston Martin in 27, do you think he would finally have the chance to get a car and a team fully focused on him like Max has with Red Bull? Well, assuming Adrian Newey's still there in 27, yes. I mean, the only reason to go to Aston Martin, in my opinion, is to work with Adrian Newey. And I think if Charles was there under Adrian, I think it would be an unbelievably strong combination. Adrian Newey, Charles Leclerc, very, very good. I mean, the only slightly disconcerting thing, and not totally surprising, is that it's not sure now whether Andy Cowell is going to stay at Aston Martin. Now, he's the sort of Adrian Newey of the power unit management industry, Formula One thereof. He's the guy that basically masterminded Mercedes powertrains that Norbert Haug, the Mercedes team manager at the time, put together. And he and Andy Cowell were just fabulous in everything they did. And then Andy left, and then he resurfaced, oddly, as team principal or something like that, COO or something at Aston Martin, which at the time I didn't really pay much attention to, because I thought, oh, well, they probably used up all the other titles, and so he's obviously just going to be running the power unit division, and Adrian's going to be doing the chassis, and they're going to be having dinner every night, and it's going to be an unbelievable car. But it turns out that I was wrong there, and apparently, and he was miscast, and he was put in a team principal role as distinct from doing what he does well, which is run the power unit division. So no surprise, as a team principal, he's come up against Adrian, apparently, is what the stories are, and that's no surprise, because Adrian, if you've got Adrian Newey, you basically then no longer really need a team principal in the 2025 perception of the title, because Adrian Newey is your team principal. Obviously, you want very good people around him, and you want a guy who's doing all the sustainability and the budget cap, and you're doing all the political machinations with the FIA. You want all those different people, but in terms of making the key decisions of the team, like drivers, concept of the car, who's running the engine program, how we work with Pirelli, all those key things, that's Adrian Newey at Aston Martin. And so there was never going to be room for another so-called team principal. And I imagine that's why they've fallen out, if indeed that's the case. If they haven't, then okay. So if it's still Adrian there in 27, then yeah, for sure Charles will have a brilliant chance to win a world championship. If Adrian's left by then, and Andy Cowell has left, I'm not so sure. I think there'll probably be better British team options for Charles to go to than Aston Martin. Max 790. Peter, what's going on with Tsunoda? He said to the Japanese media, this is the worst car he's driven in Formula One, yet Max has won races, etc. Yuki's not slow. Is it the pressure or a technique flaw? Well, it's a technique flaw, obviously, because the car's pretty good. I mean, unlike McLaren, where they sort of run two identical cars in setup because they've got to in case one driver is favoured. In the case of Red Bull, they've got a senior engineer engineering Max's car, and they get the car that Max wants to drive as best they can at any given weekend. And obviously Yuki has his own team of people there, but it's a technique flaw. I mean, he just doesn't have the touch, he doesn't have the finesse, he doesn't have the softness, the suppleness of Max Verstappen, he doesn't have the harmony of rates of input of Max Verstappen, and he doesn't have the imagination to be able to create short corners, even if he had all that stuff, in my opinion. He's just a very fast racing driver who brakes late and turns in at the last possible moment. that enables him to get the power on as soon as possible, which is leaving tiny margins everywhere. And you need a very good car, very good set of tyres to maximise that over a reasonable distance. And he's driving a car that's absolutely knife edgy, and it's just showing up how good Max Verstappen is, obviously. And so, yeah, I mean, for Yuki to say that is crazy. He should be saying, wow, it's incredible how well Max Verstappen drives this car. It's not an easy car to drive. I'm trying to learn in every way I can from Max in the way he's driving it. And I hope I'll be a better driver because of it. And I think I'm a better driver now than I was 3 months ago. But I'm still not there yet. I've got a lot to learn still. I thought I had it, but I thought I'd got through my learning process. But Max has shown me there's a whole new world out there. And I've got to keep my head down and keep going. And I believe I can do it. And I hope I continue to have the chance in 2026. That, in my opinion, is what he should be saying. Instead of, it's the worst car I've ever driven. And not explaining why he's not there. But of course, ego also plays its role in Formula One drivers' vernacular, doesn't it? So, no surprise, I guess, that Yuki isn't saying any of my stuff. 01 Drew C. Since Lando and McLaren, Daniel fell behind. Now Oscar falling behind. Only Sainz didn't fall behind. My question, why did McLaren make Aussie drivers slow? Daniel became a bus driver there, now Oscar. Well, give Daniel a chance. I mean, it wasn't the best car around, was it? At the time, and he still won the Italian Grand Prix, and he was still good, and he was still driving well in races. I actually don't buy that. I think Daniel at McLaren was a better driver than he was at Renault. I don't think he was as good as he was at Red Bull, but that's another story. But I think he was coming back very well, and I think he was set up to be a really good foil for Lando, and to be there as Lando started to pick up pace with the increased competitiveness of the car. And I think Daniel would have won races too. So I always say that was a great driver combination that should never have been broken up. But they broke it up with Oscar. And Oscar, I think obviously Oscar is and was quicker than Daniel. Whether he's as quick now as Daniel was at his peak at Red Bull, a good question. I'm surprised nobody's ever asked that, because it is a very good question. I don't think he is. I think Daniel at his peak at Red Bull was as quick as Oscar is now, or was at the beginning of this year, and possibly a better race driver in traffic and TrackCraft, and a bit smoother on his inputs as well, and probably better with his technical feedback too. So I think Daniel was poorly treated, and it's a great shame he's not there, to be honest. As for why do they make Aussie drivers slow? Well, they're chalk and cheese, aren't they? The difference between Daniel and Oscar. I think Oscar's from Melbourne, I think. Daniel's from Perth. Perth to Melbourne it's a bigger gap than, I don't know, I'm making this up. Athens to London, I don't know. But it's a big gap, and it's got not cultural gap, but definitely the way they are as people, totally different people in my opinion. I mean, Daniel's outgoing, big smile, white teeth, and very nice guy, good racer, very good. He just loved life. Whereas Oscar's a sort of laid back Steve Waugh, Australian, doesn't want to talk any more than he needs to, publicly that is, and just gets on with it. Very good with the old one-liners. And laconic in the Frank Gardner, Jack Brabham sort of way. So very different. Admittedly, same passport, no doubt about that. But I think it's just the way the cookie crumbled, isn't it? Drew C. All respect to Ricciardo, if he was still with Red Bull in 21, Max and Lewis may have had another problem to deal with. Yeah, I think Daniel obviously, from his point of view, and we said it at the time, he should never have left Red Bull, and everybody from Jonathan Wheatley downwards was begging him to stay and telling him he was going to win a lot more races at Red Bull. But I don't know whether it was inside himself, looking at himself in the mirror in the morning, or whether it was people outside telling him. But there was this feeling of, I'm not getting treated fairly at Red Bull, it's all going to Max, I've got to go to a team where it's much more equitable. And yeah, maybe it was at Renault, maybe it was at McLaren, big maybe there. And certainly there was a bigger bank account for them. But ultimately, he left the best team TAM in Formula One racing. And he'd spent his whole life trying to get into the best team in Formula One racing, and he walked away from it. And when you do that for the wrong reason, and it was the wrong reason in my opinion, it just seeps through your entire being, through your soul, through everything that you feel as a racing driver. And nothing was ever right for Daniel after that, even though obviously superficially he could put a brave face on it. It was not the right thing. He was going against the flow of the river. And so that was, that was how he found himself at McLaren. Max 790. Peter, with the issues at Ferrari, I'm reminded of the Schumacher days. You are one of the few journalists that never vilified Michael. What made him so special and so loved by the team and engineers? Well, I always loved watching Michael because he was doing the job almost to perfection. Not only in the race car, where he was really advancing the technique of left foot braking at a time when everybody was kind of get used to two-pedal cars and paddle shifts. He was taking it to another level at a time when Rubens was still had he was still braking with his right foot in the other Ferrari. Michael was taking it to this other level. That was a technique thing. His discipline of approach in terms of his physical preparation and his linear way of thinking about Formula One, just this is the goal, I don't want any distractions. I love that approach. And the way he was able to put together a package to take to Ferrari with Jean Todt, to put it all together and make it all happen in a way that you don't see drivers doing. You see drivers doing very rarely. The last example of that really was Jackie Stewart, who effectively ran the Tyrrell team with Ken by his side in the way Jean Todt was by Michael. And Jackie basically ran it. All the team revolved around Jackie Stewart. And it was the same with Michael. He knew the engineers he wanted, he knew the mechanics he wanted from Benetton, and he took them all to Ferrari, and it all worked. And today, if you'd said to Sebastian Vettel, who do you want to take to Ferrari with you? He would say, oh, I want this Red Bull mechanic. And none of it would have been right, because some of them wouldn't have been on the right term of contract to leave, and some of them were only as good as they were because of somebody else who was next to them. Michael had the ability to see all of that, whereas I don't think Vettel did, and I don't think Lewis has. Lewis has many talents, but he doesn't have that talent of Michael to be able to put a team together and make it work. And that's a huge thing. Prost didn't have that talent. He tried that with his own Formula One team, didn't work. Nicky didn't have that talent. He went back to Ferrari in a consultancy role at one point, and all his best attempt was just to put John Barnard back there, which didn't work out at that point. So yeah, it's a very rare talent that Michael had, and underrate him at your peril. Obviously on track, he was pretty wild on occasions. Not as wild as Senna, but pretty wild. And yeah, that was not a good thing. But that was, in a way, that was kind of a cool thing, because it showed that he was still just a racer, a fallible racer that could make mistakes, as well as being this amazing sort of put it together of deals and race teams. The way they put that Bridgestone deal together, so that Ferrari effectively were on Bridgestones for 4 years exclusively. A couple of teams at the back, but didn't really interfere with them. And they enjoyed the tightest interface and exchange of information between a race team and a tyre company ever seen in the history of Formula One, and it'll never be seen again. We'll never get that close with the Pirellis now in monopoly. But Michael, Ross Brawn, Jean Todt, with the Bridgestone engineers, basically were just building tyres for Ferrari. And it's no wonder he won as many championships and races as he did. And Michael was, in my opinion, was the catalyst to put that deal together. And don't forget, it was McLaren that brought Bridgestone into Formula One in 1998. And it was Ferrari that ended up getting, they won 2 championships, 98, 99. But then it was Ferrari that then got the benefit of the Bridgestones and basically persuaded McLaren to move to Michelin with a ruse, which was this total information thing. McLaren and Ferrari will give all their chassis information to Bridgestone to build the best possible tyres. And Michael knew from minute one that Ron would never accept that, because McLaren's chassis information was sacrosanct. And he didn't. That's why he went to Michelin. And that's why he left Bridgestone to Ferrari. Deal done. 5 world championships, here we go. Whatever it was, at Ferrari. Yeah, 5. So, he was amazing, Michael. And the team loved him because Michael, was part of his being, but also part of he knew his duty and his job was to make sure that all his guys felt very much a part of his team. And so he knew all the mechanics pretty well. He knew all their backgrounds, their families, and he wouldn't forget birthdays. And if there was a stray dog hanging out the back of the Ferrari garage at Interlagos one year, he would look after the stray dog and take it back to Germany and get it vaccinated and look after it and call it Flea. All those little things that Michael did. I don't know whether they penetrated the brains of the British journalists or not, but to me, Michael is a charming person, and he perfectly combined that with being this steely, robotic Formula One phenomenon. Yeah, I was a huge fan of Michael. Lou Camboni, 2051. Hi, Peter. I've always been a Max fan, but every week I'm more and more impressed with his skill level. I know it's very hard to compare him with drivers from previous years, but I can't think of any one driver that has been constantly as good and getting better, if that's possible. We're privileged to be watching Max making history. And you go on to say, watching from Australia via KO, I would like to give them a huge thanks for the Formula One audio feed option. Will it be available for the last 2 races? Well, yeah, and again, it's difficult to start talking about Alberto Ascari, Fangio, Sterling Moss, Jim Clark, and putting Max alongside these other drivers, and obviously right up into the modern era as well, because so many factors are different. And if you look at the way, say, Fangio was able to jump from team to team to win his 5 world championships, that just doesn't happen today, because drivers like Max get signed for 2 or 3 years. And so that's one example. Then there's the traffic thing, then there's the danger thing, then there's a number of races in one season thing, and then there's the amount of testing they did then and the testing they don't do now, and then there's the gear change thing. There's so many factors. In terms of his being a racing driver, and I think the critical point here is that he's very, very demanding of his own improvement, and loves and wants to learn all the time and be a better racing driver every race, and doesn't have a big ego in that sense, and is quite capable of learning, as he did today, as he did when he was in Formula 3. Max is very rare. I think Jim Clark was like that. I think Jimmy was fascinated by different types of cars and knew that every time he got in a different type of car, whether it be a NASCAR stock car, some weird Indy car, I'm not talking about Lotus Indy cars, although some of those were weird, or a big banger sports car or a touring car, it would in some way it would refine his driving and expand his ability to do what he does behind the wheel. And that was how, there wasn't much time to do anything else then, because they just raced every weekend. And Max is obviously in a different era, but I think his learning process is now, in this age, it's with the engineers and with the telemetry that he has that's relevant to himself, experimenting with things rather than looking at another driver's telemetry, which is where most drivers, I think, make a mistake. Max is very much related to what he does, and he knows the feel he wants from a car, and he knows that if he has that, he can get the best from the car at any given moment. And he works so closely with the engineers now, and he's getting better and better at translating that feel into something that they can touch with numbers and adjustments to tune it to the way Max wants to drive. And that's what you're seeing. And of course, he's getting better at that all the time, and he's learning all the time, and he doesn't forget things. But I wouldn't say he's a better driver than Alberto Ascari or Fangio or Moss. because you just can't compare those eras. But he's right up there with them, no question about that. And he's right up there with Michael. We're just talking about Michael, of course. Johan Feenstra, 8778. What is going on with Russell? He's fighting Max as hard as he can, but with Norris, he does nothing. It looks like it's all personal for him. Oh, you're saying that he's more aggressive with Max on track than he is with Norris? There was a moment, wasn't it, when Norris got him at Vegas? Yeah. I just think, I'm not sure there've been that many occasions, have there, when it's been George and Lando with about the same tyre age on their cars, both cars going well, racing wheel to wheel. We quite often see George and Max in that situation because they're behind the McLarens and they're sort of, best of the rest, and they're kind of pretty equal. But in terms of George versus Lando, we haven't had that much of it, I don't think, have we? And I would imagine George is just as decisive with Lando as he is with Max. And Max is just as decisive with both of them as well. It's just that I suppose, Max is the definitive article when it comes to a racer being able to position his car and the body language he needs to intimidate the other driver. And George is a sort of slightly lesser version of that, but not too far away. And so that's why when they're near one another, sparks fly, as per Qatar, turn one. So, yeah, whereas Lando will probably back away, I guess, particularly now with points and stuff at stake. You've got to take that into account as well. But anyway, I mean, George is definitely a harder, more aggressive driver than Lando Norris. And that's a given, isn't it? And if Lando does try to take it to George, he's probably going to be the guy that comes out of it worse. Leonardo Puppets. Hi, Peter. Hope you do well. Thank you very much. I do, indeed. If Andy Cowell leaves Aston Martin, what team should go after him? Ferrari, maybe? Or do you think he would be only interested in a team principal role? Well, I'm a bit confused about it because I can't imagine Andy going to Aston Martin and saying, no, I don't want to run the engine program. I want to be team principal. I just can't see that in his character. I don't know him that well, but I just can't see him thinking that way. And I can't imagine him now thinking, I just want to be a team principal. I imagined always that he would want to be in a nice team with nice people, all heading in the right direction with a phenomenal budget to develop the engine program. And he would be, in that situation, he would be a great guy. Yes, he would be good at Ferrari. Although the Ferrari engine, interestingly, it's not bad, is it? Pretty quick in a straight line in Vegas, and Nico Hülkenberg was good in the race. I mean, the Ferrari engine isn't anything like as bad as the Ferrari chassis this year. So do Ferrari massively need an Andy Cowell? Not sure they do. So it would be others. I find it extraordinary, really. And if you're Honda, you would be thinking, if I was involved in the Honda Formula One program near the top, I would be thinking, we got Andy Cowell now. This is brilliant. We'll learn everything we can from Andy, and we'll basically let him run our program now. And we'll provide all the facilities, and we got all the money we need, blah, blah, blah. And it'll be just amazing. But obviously Honda just have let it get away from them, and they were probably confused that he became a team principal rather than the guy they want. And now, if you were Honda, you would say, well, we'll employ Andy then. We'll get Andy to run the Honda Formula One program. That's the way to do it. That would be the most logical thing, actually. That would certainly stir things up at Aston Martin, wouldn't it, if Honda did that? But they're probably not allowed to do that in their contract or something stupid. So I don't know. I mean, obviously a lot of people are going to say Ford could do with an Andy Cowell, but we don't know that, do we? We don't know how good or bad Ford are going to be. And as I keep saying, I have a lot of time for Phil Prue, who's running the Ford engine program, and so with Red Bull. So I think the jury's out. But Andy, there's no doubt Andy did a superb job for Mercedes from 2014 onwards, when we went through the whole hybrid thing, and he was just head and shoulders above the rest, I think. And I just still don't even understand how Aston Martin wanted to employ him as a team principal. It just doesn't make sense to me. If you've got Adrian Newey there, why would you want that? If you've got Adrian, you don't need a team principal. You just have lots of good secretaries around with notebooks. Yes, okay, Adrian, right, get this done, get that done. That's how you'd run Aston Martin around Adrian Newey. Zishan Afsar again, sorry. Peter, if you were managing Charles Leclerc's 16 career, would you be looking to get a move away from Ferrari for 27? This year finally seems to have broken his faith in Ferrari. Well, I don't think he's ever had faith in Ferrari, in the sense that if it was an open book all these years, would he have always stayed at Ferrari and resisted going to Red Bull or Mercedes or even McLaren? I don't think he would have. I think he would have been out of Ferrari a long time ago. But because there's never been a logical way for him to go to any of those leading three British teams, there's never been a vacancy really that makes sense, he stayed at Ferrari, which is the next best option, obviously. And so I don't think he's always thought, I've got to be with Ferrari, they're the team, I've got so much faith in them, they're going to win a championship. He's just thought, well, you know, best next option, we'll stay at Ferrari. What else am I going to do? Red Bull have got Max, Mercedes have got Lewis and then George, and McLaren have got Lando and Oscar. So, you know, no room for me in any of those. I'll stay at Ferrari, thank you very much. So I don't buy that. You know, he's always had faith at Ferrari, and the logic of 26 is that really nobody knows how it's going to be. Looks like it's going to be pretty scrappy, with lots of people managing their power units and how much electric power they've got. It's going to be really messy, I think. And Ferrari will either sink without trace, or because it's really messy and difficult for everybody to get on top of things, they might luck into a win or two, and Ferrari might be, you know, half reasonable as a result. So the only way of addressing your real question is to say, until we get to the sort of midway point of 26, there's no point Charles or George or anybody making a decision about 27. And at that point, midpoint 26, maybe a little bit before then, that's when you're going to see somebody like Leclerc saying, well, this Ferrari is a complete waste of time. I'd rather drive alongside George at Mercedes than just stay with this Ferrari if Mercedes will have me. Now, that's not a great thing for George. It's not a great thing for Leclerc, but I'm sure he would take it, because it's got to be better than scratching around at Ferrari and going nowhere. And so, yeah, you know, wait and see, I think. But don't assume that Charles is just obsessed with Ferrari. He wants the best race car he can have, for sure. He doesn't really care what it is or where it is, where it's being built. He just wants the best car underneath him. But until now, and even now, he doesn't have any option but to stay at Ferrari. So he just needs to put his head down, get on with it. And when anybody talks to him about Ferrari, he has to say how much he loves the prancing horse and loves Ferrari, and he's always believed in Ferrari, and he's always had faith in Ferrari. Of course he's going to say that. He's not going to say the opposite, is he? But the reality where else would he be? Lagrangian density. Yeah, right. You again. This will be a difficult question for sure. Howdy to you and yours, Peter. I've loved the commentary you've given us with Mr. Slade as of late. It's precisely the sort of touch that is so appreciated. Thank you, and keep on going, sir. Well, that was an easy question to answer. Thank you very, very much. Nice for you to make that comment. Nice for Mark to hear that as well from an engineer-orientated viewer. And my feeling is that it's quite rare, actually, to be able to tap the brain of a Formula One race engineer, because not many of them are allowed to talk to the media if they're currently with a team. And it's a very different form of engineering to designing and engineering a racing car or an engine or a power unit or tyres, for that matter. It's very specific. And there are some questions, it's quite funny, you say to Mark, what do you think about that? And he'll say, well, I don't know, I never really came across that. And then other times, he'll, like the measuring system for the skid blocks, he'll know exactly how it's done. And that's brilliant, because only race engineers really know that sort of stuff. So, yeah, big thanks to Mark Slade if you're listening, watching. And we'll have him on the show as much as we possibly can, because he's a gem, I think, and gives a view of Formula One that very few others are able to offer. And we're lucky to be able to do that. Lou Camboni, 2051, again, I think. Regarding car setup, why does the setup of one car affect both cars? Can the team not set up each car differently to suit the driver? Yeah, of course you can. And that often happens. And indeed, that's why, we don't know for sure. But, if you think back to the Belgian Grand Prix last year when George was disqualified and Lewis inherited the win, both driving for Mercedes, maybe George was using a different curb or something to Lewis. Probably the setup was slightly different. And probably Charles and Lewis are probably slightly different. Most cars are different. It's just that I think the opposite is true at McLaren. I think because they've put themselves in this situation where they've got both drivers can be world champion this year with 2 races to go, they're very, very nervous about one driver going off with a setup that's different from the other, because if it works, it'll upset the other driver. And so they've got to try and keep things as even as possible. And it's a crazy situation in which to find themselves. I think that's what's going on. But they don't necessarily have the same setup as such. I just think Vegas, and that they were both disqualified for exactly the same reason, slightly different wear rates, but exactly the same reason, is an indication of how closely McLaren, or how scared McLaren are not to allow the drivers to go in different directions. And as I said at the start of the show, it's all down to the pressure of this Drivers' World Championship. And if logically Lando and his engineers came to the conclusion that they should just above all leave margin on everything that's likely to be a talking point in Parc Fermé after the race, because they're ahead on points and they don't need to take risks, they just need above all to make sure they finish. If they can win the race, brilliant, but they've got to make sure they don't get disqualified. If he does leave that margin, the other side of the McLaren garage will know that, and then immediately Oscar Piastri will say, well, he's leaving that margin, let's go to a lower ride height, I've got to try and get the pole, why don't I do this? That's what's going to happen. No race driver is going to want to say no to a speed advantage. Something like ride height, where it's a couple of mil affects 1/10 of a second a lap of free downforce with no additional drag. A driver's going to take that. If they took it back in the Lotus days, when it was basically, we're going to put this new part on the car, I won't mention any driver's name here, and it's for sure it's going to be 0.3 of a lap quicker, but it might break, they'll all say, oh yeah, put it on. That's racing drivers. That's what they do. And that's where McLaren are. Yassine Bey 9593. I haven't pronounced that very well, but I'm sorry about that. Hi, Peter. Hope all's well. Well, yeah, very well. Thank you very much. What do you think of Verstappen's chances are of retaining the championship? Well, they went up about 3,000% after an hour after the Vegas Grand Prix, I think. That's for sure. It's realistically, if Lando finishes on the podium the next 2 races, he's world champion, I think, isn't he? If he doesn't finish Qatar, or doesn't score in Qatar, and Max wins Qatar, then we've got a serious world championship. So I'm not saying anything different to anybody else when they look at the numbers and look at what could happen. At the moment, you'd like to be Lando Norris, but we were saying at the moment we'd like to be Oscar Piastri 6 months ago, and look how that's dwindled away. For me, Max's greatest thing at the moment is that of course he wants to be world champion. He's a total racer and wants to be world champion. But his view is, I've got nothing to lose. From where I am, I've got nothing to lose. And I think that's, A, it's going to be worth watching as a result. And B, I think that will give him freedom as a racing driver to bring the best out of himself. Whereas I think Lando wakes up between now and Qatar thinking, I've got a lot to lose. Oh, I don't want to lose any more. I better have that mindset of just go out and win the race and relax and enjoy myself. Oh yeah, but what about Oscar? What's he going to do? Curbs, ride height. Oh, sprint race. Yeah. What happens if we don't? Lots of things come in. Whereas Max won't be thinking of any of that. He'd just be thinking, got nothing to lose, go for it. What is there to lose? I'm a long way behind anyway. So, I mean, it's not that long, is it? I mean, it's a win away, assuming there's no point scoring at Lando's end. But if Lando does continue to pick up points, obviously then it's much, much more difficult. Connor Clark, 777. Hi Peter, watch from Ireland. Just wanted to ask about Elio De Angelis. No one seems to talk about him much. How good was he? Well, we actually have talked about him quite a lot on this channel from time to time, and I've put up the odd short about him when I just suddenly think of a piece of music that reminds me of Elio, or the way he was as a person. He was a lovely, lovely guy, one of my favourite people in Formula One, absolute star. I mean, you never, I mean, this is not demeaning in any way, but when he was at Shadow with Jan Lammers, Jan was a great guy, and I got on really well with Jan, good friend, but he was Jan Lammers, you could sit down in the coffee shop and you have bacon and eggs, whatever, and coffee, and it would just be a laugh, and But Elio was a class act. Even then, it was, there's Elio. Oh, look at Elio. Well, there's Elio De Angelis. It was like that. He was a star long before he became a star, if you see what I mean. And he was never egotistical. He was quite softly spoken. He was like all very cool Italians. Even if he wasn't trying, he looked perfect. The Australian logo with the kangaroo polo shirt and the train. I mean, he's wearing running pants long before they were fashionable, and he would, Sony Walkmans were a big deal, and he would listen to Mozart. He had listened to Al Jarreau. He had listened to very cool stuff. None of it was sort of frenetic music. It was all very relaxed and cool with Elio. And he drove beautifully. He definitely was not a short corner driver. I would say very similar to Carlos Sainz now, the Carlos we have today, quite soft with his inputs, very smooth, very good with the rear tyres, but not as quick as Nigel Mansell, that's for sure. Not far away, but not as quick as Nigel, a couple of tenths. Nigel could easily do a couple of tenths inside Elio. Elio, to match Nigel, had to be absolutely flying and on the limit, and probably would make the odd slight mistake. But as Carlos Sainz would be if he was against Nigel at his peak today. But Elio was just one of these class people that, a bit like Francois Sever, who was just, he's just so happy he was around. He was such a lovely guy. And I remember his funeral in Rome with great sadness, because it was a beautiful cathedral. It was a lovely day. I remember the doves flying at the top, right up in the top of the cathedral. And afterwards I went out there was some sort of gathering, but I didn't go to it. I went to the Foro Italico, where the Italian Open tennis was either just finished or was about to get underway. And I just sat there because I knew I'd played quite a lot of tennis with Elio, and just sat there and thought for about an hour, and then got the flight back to England. Very, very sad. Terrible. Even today, I don't even want to think about his accident and what he went through with that fire, and Alan Jones and Nigel unable to do anything about it. And Nigel, think about this. Nigel had actually rescued Elio from a terrible rip in the current outside the Intercontinental Hotel in Rio, not Ipanema or one of those great beaches. It was a little bit further up, and it was a beach with a very, very strong current, and it went very deep very quickly. And Elio was one of the guys in trouble. Peter Collins was another, and Nigel actually rescued both of them. And I'm not sure Elio would have survived if Nigel hadn't helped him get back to shore. And then Nigel lost this battle to try and save Elio. Stefan Johansson too. I mean, Stefan can't talk about Elio today without tears in his eyes. And nor can Alan Jones, really. I mean, it was just absolutely horrendous. So, yeah, I really miss Elio. What a great guy. What a lovely man, and a great driver. Richard Patrick, 2923. Those McLaren statements are BS. They never reported porpoising on any radio. They were aware of the plank problem way before lap 40 because they had Lando lifting on 4 high-speed corners. Okay, I'll take your word for that. That's not what we saw, and if we did, a lot of it was time management in the view of Mark Slade and I think. But when Mark Slade says he's not sure if McLaren knew what was going on with the plank or not, I think we have to accept that because he's a race engineer and he knows what he's talking about. So, I think, the fuel reference, as you say, was lap 50. And there was a moment when they said, go get Max to Lando, didn't they? And that was well after lap 40. So would they have said that if they knew that the plank damage had been done? You're saying they were aware of the plank problem way before lap 40? Unlikely, I think. Connor Clark from Ireland again. If Hamilton form continues into the new cars in 26, would you advise Lewis to retire at the end of the next season? Well, he doesn't need my advice on when to retire. I would have thought enough has happened this year to make him start thinking about that. And he has used the R word, hasn't he? After Spain, I think he used that word, didn't he? I think he failed to get out of Q1 or something. And yeah, he just wants to be winning races as he used to, and he can't. Even now, he probably can't get his head around what's going on, which is bizarre because has he not been watching Charles Leclerc for the last 5 years and how good Charles is? I mean, he knows how good Charles is, going back to that battle they had at Monza. So going into the second chicane. So, none of this actually should be a surprise for Lewis if he took the option not to work on his driving a bit over the winter and sharpen up his skills, having gone into a sort of plateau in year 3 at Mercedes post Abu Dhabi 21. And so he didn't do that. So why is he surprised to be blown away by Charles? And even today, he doesn't look like Charles in the car, does he? He's all over the place, really. And it's very sad to see. I mean, all those cones and stuff under the car before he started that last lap at Q1, which he didn't actually do anyway, because Ferrari didn't tell him that the red gantry light was not significant. And so it goes on. But yeah, I mean, if he's got a contract and Ferrari cannot get out of it, and Lewis there are still plenty of things he loves about his driving or being in Formula One, for sure he'll go into 26, won't he? And if the car's terrible again, it'll be a different sort of terrible though, I think. I don't think it'll be this sort of stuff. There'll be additional power unit energy storage issues and how Ferrari manage all that during the race, which may be chaotic, may be brilliant. We just don't know. And it'll be a messy year anyway, I think. Quite a difficult year to judge your driving. More difficult than this year when he can just put himself up against Charles Leclerc and say what's going on. And not much is going on. But if after 25 he wants to continue, he isn't going to stop anytime soon, I guess, and we'll see. I doubt he'll get any offers after 26 if he doesn't want to. If he wants to continue to race, and Ferrari don't want him anymore, you'd have to take. I hate to say it, but he'd probably have to take money to a team, wouldn't he? I don't know who would employ Lewis at that point if he's not quick-ish, and Ferrari don't want him, but he still wants to race. I don't think he'd ever let himself get into that situation. He would retire gracefully and become the great ambassador of the sport that he is already and will continue to be forevermore, I'm sure. Lovely guy. Stephen Dobbins. Hi, Peter. Do you think McLaren are pushing the limits of legality re-ride height due to not developing the car since the summer, similar to Mark's woes in 21? Merck's woes, probably. No, I don't. I think they're a victim of having to let both drivers race one another into the climax of the World Championship this year, and therefore neither of them are going to have any more than the minimum amount of margin on things that are important. Now it's different. Now we've had Vegas and they've been disqualified. From here on in, for sure they'll be building margin in, but we're talking in the build-up to Vegas. And And I think it's entirely due to not managing the drivers well, not having a clear number one and number two, as you would in the Michael era when you had a car as dominant as the McLaren, or in other eras as well. Certainly, Nigel 92 is another good example. Lewis with Bottas, very good example. Max with Perez, all nicely balanced teams in terms of where it's going to go. And if Max says I want to run, if the engineers of Max Verstappen say I want to run this ride height because this leaves us with the right amount of margin, blah blah blah, there's no way Yuki Tsunoda's engineers are going to say, oh, we're going to run less ride height. No way. But at McLaren, if Lando's engineers, as I said earlier, say we're going to run this ride height because we want to leave a margin, Oscar's engineers immediately are going to say, oh, in that case, we'll eat into some of that margin and we'll give Oscar a slightly lower ride height because he's in the running for the World Championship and he wants to beat Lando. That's what it's going wrong. It's nothing to do with development of the car, in my opinion, or lack of development. What do they need to develop? It's a quick car anyway. Very quick car. Langrandian Density again says, however the season ends, I reckon the silly season's going to hold some awfully silly surprises. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting listening to Andy Stevenson and Paul Monahan in the press conference thing before Vegas talking about 26. And Andy Stevenson sort of quite cynically saying to Paul, after Paul had described what was going to happen in the first couple of tests and how they was going to be throwing bits at the car and see where they're at, and no one will really know until they get to a week before the first race sort of thing. And Andy Stevens said, oh, thanks for telling us your test program. That's really, that was good, Paul. Sort of kind of showing him up a bit, I guess, upstaging him, I guess, in a way. Well, I didn't get that because I think Paul's absolutely right. I don't think he did give anything away. And I'd like to thank Paul Monahan for the way he spoke about that, because I don't think we should draw too many conclusions from the first week or so of testing with these new regulations, because there are going to be so many different bits that aren't ready and not on the cars, and everybody's going to be finding their way with energy storage management and all the other stuff that comes with 26, that even after day one, and there'll be imagine the photographers and all the interest around day one of the first running of these cars, we should just be quite patient and wait and see what develops over that period of time. But I think both of them said that it was going to be, a very fragmented year, probably the right word, with a lot going on, a lot of people pushing here, backing away there, not really understanding yet how to run the car, and that's going to take a while from all the teams. Whether that's the advantage of the fans, I've got no idea. Personally, I like to keep things simple. Racing engine, racing tyres, lots of noise, everybody basically in the same package, give or take all the things Formula One teams can do differently from one another. Relatively low cost engine package, get on with it. And all the environmentally friendly stuff that Formula One needs to be seen to be doing, they can do in another category over the same weekend as Formula One, but call it Formula E or whatever. And the Formula One teams can get involved in all that, and that's great for the environment, great for the carbon footprint. But let's not touch Formula One, which should ultimately just be a brilliant show. That's my philosophy, but then, who am I? Joe Dutchnell, hi Peter, how can ordinary people learn from Max to keep things simple and excel in the things they love to do? If it's journalism, being a racing driver, an analyst, manager or coach. So it's a very good question, and I often, I was talking actually, funnily enough, I was talking to Jack, my son, yesterday. We were talking about developing as a golfer and how you learn from everything that happens on the course or in the previous shot, and how you take it to the next shot you're going to play. And I was saying to him, the key always in doing that is to have a very good refresh button, and not to carry any of the pain of a bad shot or a mistake into what you're doing next, and to filter it only into positive things that you're improving, that's allowing you to improve. And I said, like Max Verstappen, for sure that's how he does it as a racing driver. He doesn't dwell on bad moments. What he does is extract the lessons that can be learnt and then moves forward. And he doesn't allow the media and the public and everything else to affect the way he's thinking. Obviously, I didn't say that to Jack. And so you're right. What you look at a guy like Max and the way he's running his career right now, you can learn a lot. Whatever walk of life you're in, you can learn. And you think, right, I believe in myself and I'm going to do this because it's right. I'm not going to do it because I want to be a star or because I want to make a lot of money or because politically it's going to make me look very, very good. You do it because it's in your heart and soul and you want to do it at the best of your ability. And if that means you're going to win the race, so be it. And that's a great philosophy to have, I think. Trust yourself. I think, just as an adjunct to that, I think the whole hashtag trending stuff, and when you look at a YouTube video and all the other videos that then come up on the other side of you may be interested in this, I think is very negative and very, very hurtful to our growth, because it's constantly telling you what you should be thinking and what you should be looking at, as distinct from what you feel like looking at and what you feel like thinking and being creative in your own way. So my advice is on those YouTube things is always go to the big screen and never look at the stuff on the side, and avoid all hashtag trending stuff, because that's what everybody else is doing. You don't want to go there. You want to think in your own way, in your own world. As a journalist, as an analyst, as a racing driver. Too many racing drivers do what everybody else does. It all started with those drink bottles, didn't it? With the long straws. He's doing it. I've got to do it. Got to be thirsty all the time. While I'm doing an interview, got to have the drink bottle. Oh, good for the sponsors. Got to start painting my helmet every race. Different helmet. Make money from all those people that want to have my helmet model every race. So another thing, branding. Good. Yeah. It's rubbish. It's complete nonsense. And it's distracting from the heart and soul of being a racing driver. I was saying to, I don't know who it was, Cameron, I think, that, for me, the logical thing for Lewis now is to stop doing any of those helmet things and go back to Rye House or Buckmore Park helmet design. Put that on the car. That's the Lewis Hamilton he wants to be. But he can't do that because he can't break the pattern now. Everybody expects a new helmet colour for every race. Yeah. Terrible. When you think of what helmet is, how personal it is, that's your personality projecting to the crowd, and what it means actually to have a long-lasting helmet. I quite like Kimi Antonelli's thing. I don't think he's changed that much, has he? I may be wrong, but I think he's got a fairly consistent, fairly retro look to his helmet. May be wrong there, but I think that's what's going on there. Another sort of follow-up, how do you keep things simple in business and life? Well, you keep things simple by trusting yourself and not worrying about other people and what they're doing and looking at them, as social media encourages to do all the time. Nothing wrong with social media. It can be very good from a safety point of view, it can be very good from an emergency point of view, it can be very good from an expressive point of view in terms of beautiful things in life. But in terms of what other people are thinking and either agreeing with them or disagreeing with them, I think it's poison, and it's wrong. It's wrong in terms of our growth as a human being, where the only thing that matters is looking within ourselves and developing as a human being, being a better person every day. Langrandian density again. Talking to Joe Duccini, taking short corners rather than short cuts has worked very well in my life on a lot of fronts. A debt of gratitude to Mr. Windsor for that. Well, that's very sweet and very kind of you to say so. Thank you. And yeah, there's a big difference between short corners and short cuts, that's for sure. Just as there's a big difference between a burnout and a standing and a practice start. Not sure what, but of course there is a big difference, because the whole practice start thing is the whole procedure, isn't it, with the clutch stationary. But, they're similar. The Matthew Red. Hi, Peter. Just a general question. What are the standards of a racetrack on where to put the finish line? Sometimes it's behind the starting grids like Silverstone. Sometimes it's not. Yeah, well, this is another question I don't really know the answer to. I think I rang Steve Nilsson when he was at the FIA about this. It was after after Abu Dhabi 21, when the whole business of the safety car restart was coming up and blah, 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 and where the line was for that. And I think I asked a question, can't remember what it was now, about why they didn't come down the pit lane, maybe it was, something like that. And I said to him, so what defines the position of the finish line? And I think he said, I'm not sure. I may be wrong, and I don't want to put words in Steve's mouth, but Anderstorp start-finish line was on the other side of the circuit to the pits. That was fun. Not the only circuit on which we've had that as well. The old Monaco for a start. So the finish line, I don't know. I think it presumably has to be a certain distance from something, whether it's from the safety car line or the exit of the last corner or something, I don't know, or before the first corner, or they've got to get the grid in a certain space. I'm going to have to ask Mark Slade about that one. I'm not going to trouble him now and ring him up because I think he's out walking his dog at the moment as well. But we'll get onto that one at the next live stream. Thank you for that anyway. It's your biotisno. There's a name for you. Good morning, Mr. Peter. Nothing to say. Here to tell you that I really appreciate your work. God bless. Have a good day. Oh, thank you very much. It's very kind. It's very kind, very touching, and very nice. Thank you. Addy boy, the fuel lifting messages were probably a red herring trying to redirect attention to fuel instead of the plank. Yeah, but why? I mean, if you're Max Verstappen, you're leading the race, you don't really care. The only thing you're worried about, the only thing you're interested in is whether George Russell can beat Lando. And you get on the radio specifically to ask that, because that would be good from a points point of view. And if you're George, does it really matter whether he's fuel saving or tyre management or plank wearing saving? If he's going slower, he's going slower. And they said to Lando, they said to Max, Lando's got some sort of issue. Doesn't matter really what issue it was. And I imagine they said the same to George. Name one last. Good morning, Peter. Are there records available for plank wear inspections from Brazil? Or do documents only become available when the allowed threshold is passed? Heard McLaren were marginal in there. Well, there are scrutineer reports made available after every race. They come out on about the Thursday, if it's a double header, on the Thursday of the next race, very late, and everybody's kind of forgotten about the previous race by then. But I need to check, actually. It's a good question, and I will raise that point in another live stream, because it's possible that the plank measurements are in there. They're fairly specific in everything that's measured, but whether it actually gives the results or just says they all passed, I don't know, because I haven't really read them in enough detail. Miami Baraz. Hi, Peter. Can you draw a short corner line for us? Well, I have drawn a few on videos. I think if you go back to some of my videos on the channel, I've done my best to do that. And it's, again, just to reiterate the point, it's not the short corner line per se, it's the ability to create the short corner line. If you've got the ability to be able to massage the front end's increasing lateral load against decreasing brake pedal pressure, and anyway, to manage a front end where you've got braking and turning going on simultaneously, if you've got that sort of rate of input harmony, then making it a shorter corner just stares you in the face as something, well, yeah, do it. Because all you want to do is be on the throttle for as long as you can before you eventually have to get into that pesky rotation point. And you want to be on the throttle as soon as you can, with the car pointing as straight as you can possibly get it, as soon as possible after that rotation point. There's your short corner. And that rotation point differs every lap, every corner, because of the changing loads, because of the different way you touch the brakes initially, the different way you touch the steering initially. Everything's different. So there's no hard and fast line. It's just a rotation point that you're trying to break down into. And to reiterate that point, Adrian Newey once saying to Rob Wilson that he was very surprised how Kimi Raikkonen was turning in at a slightly different point every lap, and therefore in Adrian's mind at that point making slight mistakes, wasn't consistent. And Rob said, on the contrary, what you're seeing is perfection, because he's actually modifying his rotation point every lap according to all the variables that are in play around the dynamics of the car. And Adrian said, yeah. Rob says, Adrian then said, I never thought of that. Rob never makes things up, and I trust him 100% in everything, and so I trust him and believe him that Adrian said that. And it's quite cool that somebody of the ilk of Adrian Newey would say that. It just shows how today a lot of people still misunderstand, I think, the whole business of the way Max drives and the way Yuki Tsunoda drives. So, yeah, Norris had a big lead so he could slow down. Piastri was in the fight until the end. Schiffcock 8336. Yeah, but Piastri was slowing down lap 20 or something, wasn't he, with graining and stuff. So, yeah, obviously Oscar was managing the car. George was. George probably had that weird steering thing going on as well. And there was Antonelli with these, hards on for the whole race, managing them as well. They're all managing. Manage. It's all about management. Super chat. Love your work, Peter. Thank you very much from Outgu. What on earth happened to Oscar? He was so good earlier in the season and now he lacks confidence and isn't quick enough. Yeah, well, if McLaren knew they'd fix it, if Oscar knew he'd fix it, and in my opinion, he became, I think anyway, I was saying, even when he was winning races at the start of the year, I was saying that it's kind of disappointing that Oscar isn't really developing as a short corner driver of the type that he showed the potential for in 2024. And it's a bit of a shame, even though he was winning races. And I think, in my opinion, that problem or that lack of development has come back to bite him, because the minute things started to go wrong, he didn't have anything in his armory to fight Lando as Lando's momentum started to build up. The minute he made the mistake on the grid at Baku and then obviously crashed on the first lap, that was the moment for Oscar to come back and get the pole in Singapore and win the Singapore Grand Prix. That was what you'd kind of expect the Oscar that we'd known up until that point to do. But he didn't. And he got more than that. He got very psyched out by Lando coming down the inside of him into turn one in Singapore and having to make room for Lando and having to just avoid hitting Lando and running very wide on understeer almost into the barrier on the outside, and expecting McLaren, because of presumably discussions they'd had, to tell Lando to give the position back to Oscar, because that wasn't on. That was against the way they'd ever talked about how a first corner should be driven between the two drivers. And they didn't do that. And then Oscar got down. And then later in the race, when Tom Stallard said, Oscar, we're just thinking about what tyres you might want. If we're in the safety car window, would you want softs? And he just said, I don't know, do whatever you want. And that was not the response an Oscar from the start of the year would have said. So he got down then. And then I think after that, I think he went into I think then he was a victim of too much information coming from Lando's side of the garage. With Lando on momentum, Oscar not finding it more difficult just to be up and driving the car in a very free and easy way. Started looking too much at Lando's telemetry, or the engineers did, and he started trying to drive Lando's lap as distinct from Oscar Piastri's lap. The lap that he could have been driving, even more so had he developed his driving at the start of the year. And then it's become a real problem, because now he's trying to be a Lando clone. And even if it works, the best he's going to be is the same as Lando. He's never going to be better than Lando. And that's where it's going wrong. And I think all that's piling up and it's becoming frustrating, and he's not getting the best from himself or from the car. And he doesn't understand why, because he's still, in his mind, he's probably still the free and easy racing driver that he always was, and can always drive a car well, and he's still got that feel of the back end of the car, and he knows when to put the power on. But wow, Lando's half a second quicker. Wow. That's where he's at, and that's a very difficult area from which to extricate yourself. And he would have had much more armory had he continued to develop his own natural style of getting into the corner a bit earlier, which is the one thing Lando's never done, and that's what Oscar could have done to stay ahead of Lando. And that's what Antonelli's doing so well, and that's what Hadjar is doing so well. They're both of them young guys who have that talent, like Oscar, but they're honing that talent and they're allowing it to develop. And I don't think Oscar has. And that's probably partly a victim of being at McLaren as well, because McLaren are so data-driven and so organised in that area and it's all full exchange of information as well, which doesn't help a guy in Lando's in Oscar's situation. So yeah, that's that. Thank you for that question. Hilarimba, hi Peter, with the plank wear risk of another disqualification, do you think this will affect the MCL39 performance? Well, I just don't think, I think they'll build in too much margin now. They're going to have to do that, aren't they? Because particularly around Qatar, where there are curbs and it's a bit of an unknown. So because of the sprint format, less time to run full tanks and all the rest of it, they're going to, what will happen now, they won't have any disqualifications, I'm sure, in the plank area anyway, but they will, in order to achieve that, they will have to build in more margin than they would normally have, which is another good thing from Red Bull's point of view, isn't it? Stanley says, Norris is the Damon Hill. Actually says just the Damon Hill of his generation. What does that mean? Unbelievably quick around Suzuka in the wet and very good around Suzuka in general, which I don't think Lando is. I mean, he's all right, but he's not Max, is he, around Suzuka? Well, anyway, make of that what you will. I'm not sure. Do I agree with that? I think in terms of style, they're not far apart, are they? Yeah, you're probably right there in terms of, I think Lando probably gets into the corners a little bit earlier than Damon did, who was pretty wide. Damon to me drove very, very much like Carlos Sainz does today. But maybe a little bit more panache in a couple of areas. Suzuka in the wet, very good example, and was very good at keeping things clear and simple and getting on with it as a racing driver should. I suppose Carlos is probably a little bit more emotional and subject to more political, interference, whereas Damon was, rock solid really, wasn't he? Very good driver, very good balance, very good car control. Nothing spiky about his driving, but no way a short corner driver, that's for sure. Dustin Hudson says, worst Ferrari ever. What are we talking about there? Road cars or? You're probably talking about this one. I can tell you there was a Ferrari that was actually worse than this. That was the 1973 Ferrari that Enzo Ferrari called it quits. He said, right, Mauro Foggieri can't build a monocoque. We'll get it done in England. And they got John Thompson, who's a very good guy, to build a monocoque around the Ferrari design. So it should not reflect on John Thompson at all. But it was the John Thompson monocoque Ferrari, and it was a 73 car. And it was absolutely horrendous. I think Jackie Arturo Mazzaria, I think. And it was just a diabolical thing. Chassis flex, the whole thing. Again, don't blame John, because he's only building it to the stress that he was given by Ferrari anyway. And it was on the back of that car that Ferrari then, from those terrible depths that they then grew back over the winter of 73, 74, with Nicky joining the team and all that testing at Fiorano and doing that whole new car with Foggieri. Actually, I think from memory, they did base the 74 car on that monocoque, I think. So again, John Thompson, good man. That's the second part of your question, but it also highlights the lack of Ferrari to find solutions and direction in the team, which is nothing new. They seem to love to trip over themselves. Well, yeah, what would life be without all that Marx Brothers stuff at Ferrari? Come on, Lewis, push. Oh, he slowed down. Oh, yeah, but I saw the red light. Oh, yeah, but the red light came on after you crossed the start-finish line. Well, why didn't you tell me beforehand? Well, I thought you'd know. Anyway, yeah, there you go. Ferrari, we love them, don't we? Stanley, Charles is one of the few Max has respect for. Yeah, absolutely. Of course, Max respects Charles. He's a very fast, very good racing driver. I think he respects Antonelli too. Looking, the way that you sort of chatting to. I caught a little bit of the live F1 commentary after the race, Oh, Croft, that's right. It was quite good how he said, "Oh, look at that! As Max just bumped into Antonelli and said, 'Oh, where'd you finish, Kimi?' And Kimi said, 'Oh, P4.' And Max said, 'Oh, good job. Yeah. Oh, that was pretty good.' And it's right. He did. That's what the conversation was, I'm sure. And I think he probably sees in Antonelli somebody who's very good on short corners, slow corners anyway, in short corners, and he's taking it to George. That's where Max is thinking, yeah, this guy's not bad, is he? Anyway, if he's taking it to George, Max is going to love him anyway, isn't he? So there you go. I'm sure Max has got a lot of respect for him. I think he's got a lot of respect for Hajar, I would think. And, he'll be thinking, yeah, he'll be a good teammate, but he'll keep me on my toes next year. Pratik Borole. Peter, do you think Pirelli FIA teams actually agree on the 25 lap limit for Qatar? With all the talent and technology in Formula One, do they really have to enforce something like this? I did talk to Mark about this as well, because the race engineer has a very good feel for something like this. And he said, Qatar is unique because it's a MotoGP type track. They're all medium and high speed corners, and the curbs are quite vicious, and there is no track like that in Formula One, and so therefore it has to be taken as an isolated case. And Mark made the point that, and we're just about to post the video where he talks about it. Actually, he makes the point that, of course, they select the tyres and build the tyres well in advance of the race, and so what you're seeing here with this decision is data from the cars mid-season showing the loads have gone up more than Pirelli are comfortable with going into Qatar. And so they're obviously erring on the side of safety, because the last thing you want in Formula One, that Pirelli want, that anybody wants, is a sort of 9 tyre failures in one race, and particularly with the World Championship at stake like this. So I think it's understandable in a monopoly. I mean, bear in mind, this would never happen if we had 2 tyre companies in Formula One. The only reason we have this 25 lap limit on the tyres is because Pirelli are in a monopoly, and they have to build the tyres well in advance and allocate the tyres for that race. And they have to minimise the chance of anything going wrong with the tyres. That isn't the case if we had 2 tyre companies. They'd be a lot more competitive, and they'd be pushing one another, and the deadlines would be much shorter. And but it's a result of the monopoly. And it's, in a way, I think you could say it's pretty good that we only have it once a year. But now that it's happened twice at Qatar in 23 and 25, you'd like to think it'll never happen again at Qatar and Pirelli. But then again, if they're going to base construction systems and energy levels of the tyre around the demands of Qatar, that will obviously affect the way these tyres then perform on far less demanding racetracks. So they have to draw a line somewhere. And if there's just one circuit like that, I think it's just unfortunate it's the penultimate race. But if it was the first race or the 4th race, we probably wouldn't notice it as much. But I think that's where we're at. Mickles Allen, hi Peter. Las Vegas qualifying in the wet I found to be refreshing. Drivers having to build their laps as their confidence built. Thoughts? I love the wet, and it was wonderful to see the wet tyre in use, actually, going out there and being useful. And I was amazed how many people went out on inters right at the start, but they all very quickly came back in for wets, and it was good. Yeah, it was. When you're on board and the guy's going through the gears and it's just wheel spinning, he's just short shifting on the straight to try and minimize wheel spin, and it's just the back end's aquaplaning. It's all quite impressive, isn't it? Those are the moments when you think, not sure I do want to be a Formula One driver after all that. and it's very, very good. And I think George was quickest, wasn't he, in both sessions? Both wet sessions. Let me just go back through that. And then they went to inters for the last. But it was dramatic, and I love watching it, and very unexpected as well in Vegas, Nevada desert. You wouldn't really think it was going to rain there, would you? Go back through all my notes. Not very clear here. Windsor as ever. Oh yeah, here we go. George Russell was P1 in both sessions on the wet tyre, and then P4 on the intermediates. P2, Max was P2, P5, P2, pretty consistent. Norris was only P13 on wets in FP1. Interesting, eh? We know that. I mean, he just got in, didn't he? And where was Piastri? P6, P10, P5. Yeah. So yeah, George Russell, P1, P1, P4, impressive in the wet. Very good. Right. Stephen Dobbin says, don't forget to smash the like button, everyone. Well, it's very kind, Stephen. Thank you. Very kind. People do if they subscribe. We're getting there as a channel, and the more momentum we have as a channel, the more hopefully I'll be able to bring everybody in terms of, guests and other stuff. What's this? Dean Tate, yeah. IMO, most auto racing organizations are doing well. However, without a doubt, all of the TV announcer teams are just terrible. They all yell and talk so fast, too fast. I watch muted. Oh, well, that's a shame. I personally watch and listen only to the onboards, so that keeps me busy. 2 or 3 onboards simultaneously. Quite good fun. Yeah, I don't think there's any reason for all that shouting and screaming, to be honest, on any sport, but lots of people seem to love it. And more importantly, all the directors and the people that employ these people think that it's the way to get all the excitement going. But it's a shame. I mean, the golf analogy is Henry Longhurst and Peter Allis, who could say so much by saying nothing. The pauses were everything. Henry Longhurst, if George Sanders misses a 3-foot putt to win the British Open, Henry Longhurst would just go, that would be it. You don't need to say anything. Quite right. You can imagine all the guys today, what they'll be saying. Daniel Agostin, hello from Qatar, Peter. Hello from Qatar. Yeah, hi from Qatar. Great that you're there. Hope you're going to the race. Peter, the 2 remaining races can be even more dramatic. Hopefully they will be. Yeah, well, they probably will be. So, there we go. Going to have to finish any minute now. Old Monk says, the way McLaren speaks sounds more like a cult than a racing team. Well, I have been saying that, I can imagine the guitar sessions around the campfire of the lake down there in Woking, all holding hands, all equal, all happy, all running as a team. Yeah, and that's part of their problem. I mean, you're not that far away, really. Okay. Bono Bronk. Hi, Peter. One non-Formula One question. It's the Farewell World Rally Championship rally for both Kalle Rovanperä and Ott Tanak. First, and Ott Tanak 5th in the shakedown today. Good. I hadn't seen the shakedown results. That's good to know. What's your take on WRC for next season? It's interesting, isn't it? There's a new Rally 2 Lancia that looks pretty special. Looks nice. And I think there's a Cupra or something like that. Rally 2 car. So, I don't know. What do I think? I love watching Rally 2. I know they're not as quick as Rally 1. But I'm almost of the opinion that if you made Rally 2 Rally 1 as much as you did Formula 2 Formula 1 in 1952, then no one would notice. And if all the top guys were all in Rally 2 cars against all the current Rally 2 stars and the costs were less as a result, I think it would be brilliant. That's my rather probably silly thought. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to really miss Kalle Rovanperä because I love his approach, I love his personality, and I love the way he drives. So I'm really, really going to do all I can to follow every round of the Japanese Super Formula next year when he's racing there and really try and do something there. Kalle reporting from Japan after every race would be good, wouldn't it? And then Ott Tanak, very quick. I've got less feel for Ott. I think he's very good, very quick, but I don't know him at all. And he's had his fair shunts, is what I would say. 32, I think, at the last count. Some of them very, very big. So good luck to him. And we wish him well with his retirement in Estonia. I think that's what's happening there. The next year, I mean, it's difficult to see Toyota not dominating rallying now. They're replacing Cali with Ollie Solberg, who's super quick, great guy as well, and brilliant to watch. So what a team they have. They're keeping Sami Bahari there as well. And they're still going to have Ogier, and they're still going to have Elfyn Evans and Katsuda. So very good team at Toyota. And the advantage, of course, if you have those cars, is that you're doing more Hankook testing as well, because you're limited the amount of testing, the number of cars you're running. So they're getting much more information on the tyres than Hyundai, who appear to be, I don't know what they're going to do. It'd be interesting to see who they get to replace Tanak. I guess, there are people out there who are in the running. It could well be somebody like Danny Sordo, I guess. He's still very quick, and he's been doing very well in Rally 2 events this year. Personally, I'd love to see Isapeki Lappi in that car. I really like Isapeki. He's a great guy. He's a bit wild, makes the odd mistake, but he's such a good bloke. I'd just love to see him in a Hyundai again, going around and in Rally 1. Andreas Mikkelsen too, another guy who's very good. So yeah, Hyundai looks like it'll be struggle for Hyundai though, doesn't it? With Formo and Adrian and Terry, those cars just not consistently as good as the Toyotas for the reasons I just said. They're going to run 3 cars. It's going to be difficult. They had a few personnel shake-ups there, so maybe they'll be a little bit better. I don't know. We'll see. So there we go. Final question from Future is Bright Yal. When will Formula One come to South Africa? And if they do, would you prefer Cape Town, street race, or Kyalami? Well, Formula One should be in South Africa, and it shouldn't all be about money, money, money. It should also be about investing in the future, and there should be a much better driver program for developing countries like South Africa, India, China. I know they're not developing countries, but they are Formula One wise. And we don't have that. We have all this academy stuff, which is great in its own right, but I'd much rather see Formula One investing in a driver program in South Africa, for example. I think that'd be more meaningful, men and women, obviously. And so there's no excuse for us not to be racing in South Africa. We should be racing there as a responsible championship, doing what it does around the world. We shouldn't only be racing just where the money is. We should be racing. Will be some money in South Africa. It won't be the same as Vegas or Qatar or Saudi Arabia, obviously, but there will be some money. And Formula One, I think, should cut its cloth accordingly. And we should be going to India as well as another good country. And we should be possibly going to a country like Colombia or Peru or one of those countries as well. Anyway, getting back to the question of Cape Town or Kyalami, I've got a very soft spot for Kyalami, although obviously my roots there go back to the original Kyalami and the Kyalami ranch and the laid-back atmosphere we had there and those great Grand Prix we had on a fabulous circuit. I think the new Kyalami that we had in the early 90s was not the same, not as good, not as enjoyable, but still great to be there. And so I haven't seen any layout or drawings of a Cape Town street circuit, but if it's a proper street circuit, yeah, why not? Although street circuits are incredibly expensive to put on, and there's always it's a difficult race to keep going for a period of time, to sustain, because year 1 you can get a lot of people behind it. Year 2, that's when the people who are inconvenienced by the race start to be heard. That's when you've got to rebuild all the grandstands again, the second year running, then the third year running, and so it builds up. And that's why Bernie always tried to stay away from street circuits whenever possible and went to sort of permanent stadium circuits, because at least you know what you've got your asset, and then you run your races around it. So I don't know what the repercussions of having a street circuit in Cape Town would be. If we do anything, it needs to be for the long term, not the short term. That would be my view. And I would try to get some sort of permanent circuit built near Cape Town. I think that would be the best solution. A great, even if it's adapting. I mean, they used to race Formula One at Cape Town, didn't they, in the 60s? So let's bring that back and see what there is. I'm trying to think, what was it called? Westfield or something like that? Maybe I'm wrong. Ran Grand Prix, maybe. Anyway, yeah, I'd love to see us going back to South Africa. Bottom line. Anyway, I'm going to have to go. I'm going to do one more question here. It's more of a Mark Slade question. David Hammer, basically. David L. Hammer. Peter, I'm quite tired of hearing lift and coast by any team. Will the new rules bring some hammer the loud pedal, Lewis, instead of endless lift and coast? Best regards from Michigan. I don't think they will, no. I think there'll be more. But it won't be lift and... Well, maybe lift and coast. It'll be energy conserve. And it'll be press the overtake button. You got a bit of power here. Don't get me started. At the moment, I'm not a fan. I'm ready to be convinced, obviously, otherwise. But I think in terms of what you're asking for, I think we're going further away, to be honest. And it may not be the phraseology of lift and coast, but it'll be some other, it'll be harvest and be lift and harvest or something like that. Or press and harvest, or don't press and harvest. Something like that. Who knows? Anyway. Actually, we'll finish with a super chat, which I've just seen. Thank you very much from Debbie Maffeo, who says, talk less, drive more. It's probably a message to me, actually. Talk less. Okay, I'm just about to go. So there you go. Stephen Schuster says, hola, 5 a.m. for me. Peter, you're a legend. Thank you very much. Sorry it's 5 o'clock early rise. Thanks for all the commentary. Always look forward to your race recaps. Thanks very much. Very kind. Just scrolling through to see if there's any... more super chats that I've missed. Yeah, so no, they're got the ones, I think. Oh, she said, you missed my super chat. That was the same person. Well, I've got it now. Thank you very much for that, Debbie. Very kind. So thank you, everybody. As I say, this show is all about you guys. And thanks for supporting it, because without you, it wouldn't be there. And let's have more and more questions, and we'll be developing it as we go along. Mark Slade-wise, Craig Scarborough-wise, as we get into the new cars as well for 26, trying to get on top of what all these new regs are all about. Not going to be easy, I think. Teams know at the moment. So thanks for watching, everyone. We'll be back, obviously, back this weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, from Qatar, the usual videos, and might do a few extra interviews as well, depending on what's going on. Be fascinating, won't it? So see you then. And until then, big thanks to REC Watches, TrackNinja, to Jetcraft, and to OEM Exclusive for their support of the channel. Details about those companies you can read in the description below this video, and all our videos for that matter. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Take care.